Every day, local government makes modern life possible. Water flows, roads are repaired, parks and playgrounds open and come to life. And behind each one of those services is a story of people who show up, care deeply, and lead with purpose, even when no one is watching. This is the HaltingWinter Podcast, and it's part of the HaltingWinter Project, a movement to restore pride, purpose, and participation in local government by sharing the stories that build belonging. I'm Seth Winterhalter, and every week I tell the stories that remind America where government really lives, locally, in our cities, our counties, and our communities. Before we hear today's conversation, I want to thank our founding sponsor, Tyler Technologies, a company that's been exclusively serving the public sector since 1998. From smarter budgeting to stronger resilience, Tyler Tech equips local governments with software and solutions that help leaders serve with clarity, efficiency, and impact. You can explore practical resources and hear the real success stories from communities across the country at tylertech.com/winter. That's tylertech.com/winter. Tyler Technologies, empowering the public sector to build stronger, more connected communities. Now, let's turn to today's conversation. My guest on the podcast today is Andy Pederson, Village Manager of Bayside, Wisconsin, and the newly installed President-Elect of the ICMA. I look forward to chatting about all things city management today. But first, Andy, welcome to the podcast. It is a pleasure to have you on today.
Well, thank you, Seth. The pleasure is all mine. Really looking forward to our conversation today.
Oh, it's gonna be great. I can't wait. I'm excited. I've been so excited to meet you again in person. We're not really in person. We're virtually in person, but to spend some time with you. I've known you for the past year, and in really just hearing about your journey, it's going to be awesome. But one of the things I think is cool, we'll just set up, is we're recording this here right before Christmas. And when this releases, right before it releases, Mike Land, who is now the current ICMA president, who was also on like episode 125, I think, of the podcast, he'll have done our Reconnect series where we re-interview him and check out what he's up to in his city and talk about ICMA. And so it's just fitting that we're doing a Reconnect episode with him as the president of the ICMA. And now we get to do a full brand new episode with you, President-Elect of the ICMA. So anyway, thanks for doing this, taking the time. I know you're busy, not only with village management of the city you reside in, but with the ICMA. So anyway, I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a great conversation. But before we get into all city management things, we got to do what we do. We got to get to know you, the person. So Andy, take us back to the beginning and tell us about where you were born and kind of the childhood that shaped you.
Yeah, I mean, I was born and raised actually in Southeast Wisconsin, and that's where I work now, in Southeast Wisconsin. So just outside of the Milwaukee area in the city of Waukesha. Born and raised, there pretty much my entire life. Moved up to the Twin Cities for a little while to go to graduate school, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit because there was a little bit of law school involved in that as well. And then ultimately moved back to the Waukesha area, and now have served in the village of Bayside for the last, next month it's going to be 21 years. So that's really hard to believe, but it's been a great journey, and I'm sure we'll unpack more of that as we go along.
That's so cool. So as you're growing up, what is Andy interested in? Did you have any awareness of local government and city management as you're growing up?
No, absolutely not. I think, for me, my parents are, even to this day, my role models, mentors and such, and they were both in the private sector. They owned some businesses as well. So I worked for them for a time, and that's both rewarding and demanding, working for your parents. Particularly they owned a car wash, and I did that as a, younger child, or as a teenager. But they really instilled in me the value, the work ethics, the value of a dollar, really the person I am today. And so there wasn't much. I think I started with an interest in probably politics and and pre-law. Actually, that's what I did for my undergraduate at UW Milwaukee. And I think, as I've listened to your podcast, I think my story is very similar to others. I thought I was going to, and I actually did go to law school for a day, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more. But as part of that process, got introduced to city government. I actually did a internship in Washington, D.C. the last semester of my undergraduate, and thought I'd work in the federal government. That was obviously a very different time in the late 90s. And, you always sort of gravitate to something big and glamorous and things like that. And well, upon moving back, I transitioned and ultimately ended up in local government.
So wild. I wonder what it was about the 90s and the influence of, I don't know, like maybe it was, trying to remember when that movie, The American President with Michael Douglas came out.
Yes.
Right.
Right about the time I was in Washington, D.C., I think.
Something was going on there that I don't know. I wanted to become the president. I was the Associated Student Body President of my high school. And there was just something about, right, the speeches. It's kind of like law too. I think I watched like Boston Legal, and I watched all these law shows that were all about the drama in the courtroom and giving speeches, and then all of a sudden you meet a lawyer and they're like, that like, that's like trial lawyers are like few and far between. Like a lawyer never wants to go to trial. Like they want to settle out. It's a lot of paperwork. I was
Right.
like, that is not what I've seen on TV. That's not interesting to me. And so it's just interesting the influences we have as we grow up. What was the
Yeah.
political interest to you? What was that? Was there something you were,
I sort of remember in, probably in middle school, probably in social studies, that's one subject I always really liked. And, just doing some things about, I think we had to do some class projects on, particular elections, presidential elections and stuff, just to build awareness, in your typical social studies classes. And I think, fast forwarding, you say influence, I think of maybe the Few Good Men influence of like, okay, you can't handle the truth and, wanting to go to law school. And like I said, I moved to the Twin Cities to go to Hamlin for my to go to law school, quite honestly. And I was going to do a dual program in public administration and law, thinking whatever I did in government, I would probably need to do the law degree. And my mind was in it, but my heart wasn't. Went for a day. Remember going and sitting down in the registrar's office and saying, you know what, my mind is in it, but my heart isn't. And they said, well, a lot of people come in here, and they're just scared after the first day. And they said, you don't seem scared. I said, no. I've talked to probably no less than 50 attorneys, and every one of them said, based on what you want to do, I would not do what you're doing. And a month later, I went into public administration, and that's honestly where my journey transitioned to city government. I just happened to be standing at a table with, at the time, the deputy city administrator of the city of Apple Valley, and he needed a registration form. I had an extra one, and I handed it to him, and we started talking, and he said, hey, if you ever need an internship, call me. And I needed an internship because I had just moved up there. And little did I know, I wasn't really going for an interview. I think I already had the internship, and it was just a matter of introducing me to City Hall and things like that. And, here is the rest of the story. I think it's, 25 plus 27, 28 years later, here I am still in city government. So yeah, it's amazing, how those twists and turns. But yeah, I did not growing up, not grow up wanting to be or even knowing about city administration or anything like that.
Oh, I love it. I love it. It's so good. Well, I think I want to dive into kind of your college experience and what you just said there. These things that happen because hopefully we can encourage some young people. I think one of the things I love doing about this podcast is making sure young people know that your way is not all these journeys have these ebbs and flows and these things that
Hmm.
happen. Like when you say you interviewed, you talked to 50 attorneys, again, there's something like you're looking for validation. You're looking for like, am I on the right path? And I think that's where if we can encourage some young people to maybe take some steps they hadn't taken, or encourage them that, like you say, you started it, you thought this was, and then you just knew though, this is not, what am I doing? And to have the wherewithal to be that self-aware and to make a decision that I'm sure felt risky. Like, if I don't do this, what am I going to do? So let's dive into that. When you get to the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee for your undergrad, again, poli-sci, pre-law, what happens during that undergrad that kind of, again, made you go law, or what, anything happening there that put local government on the radar, or was that city of Apple Valley, moment just random out of that?
Yeah, the local government aspect really never evolved in undergraduate school at all. I didn't have the awareness. I didn't have the knowledge, didn't honestly even know the profession existed, quite honestly. And I commuted to UWM. And so I did, one of the things, like I mentioned with my parents, installing a great work ethic. I worked and actually managed 3 video stores during college and things like that. So I, was busy balancing all of that. And so it really wasn't, like I said, I did my internship, and it wasn't really until that decision after law school, that day of law school, that I thought, you know what? And if I wouldn't have met that deputy city administrator, things could be very different. And I think, I remember that story because I want to, not only share that, but I remember that and trying to introduce others who may not know about this profession to consider it. I mean, it's an incredible profession. It's a noble calling. It's something that I don't think a lot of people are aware of. And there's so many different things that you can do in local government. It's not just about city administration, but planning, accounting. I mean, we know all of those things. And I think, it's just opening up that exposure to people.
Absolutely. It's one of the things is I've been working on kind of what we're now calling the HaltingWinter Project, right? How do we just get the word out of local government? Because just like you said, here you are, you've served almost over 2 decades now at Bayside as a city manager, and yet you had no idea of local government kind of growing up. And I think that's the vast majority of people. We just take all these services for granted, and we have no idea who really does all this work. And I have this passion. I believe that I could go into any high school in America and find young people with passions and desired skills and strengths, and we could find a place for them in local government, from the science that goes into water to streets. And it's not just like public works isn't just a shovel. There's so many parts of public works and infrastructure and engineering, and from HR. I mean, it's so expansive, and it's so cool that it's what I love about it is it's missional. Every day, the work you do with your skills and strengths impacts normal people living a life trying to find joy and meaning in their own lives. And so, man, building that is just awesome.
Yeah, I think most people ask, so what do you do? And then, I guess I'll share a story. Last year we started a youth citizens academy. We have regular citizens academy, but I really wanted to try to engage with the youth to expose them to that. If anything else, maybe get a seasonal job, because it's always amazing to me how many seasonal employees, especially in public works, ultimately, come into local government or maybe city administration. And so, opening up their eyes. I think we had 8 or 10 students last year, attend 6 or 8 sessions with us, and it was highly interactive. We catered to the audience. I think it was ranging from 14 to, or age 12 or 13 to 17, and just exposing them to all the different things that we do, from hearing 911 calls to utilizing the fire hose at the fire department to operating the skid steer and DPW. It's there's so many different things that can be done. So anything we can do collectively to expose people is great.
I love it. I love it. So did you mention that you did an internship or something in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, so my last semester, I did a internship with a small nonprofit, more advocacy, and it was more in the congressional realm, of doing research. Actually, I was very fortunate. We got to testify in some legislation, and I think it was the Maryland state legislature, just to do that. And it was really to get exposure more to the federal government, and my interest in politics at the time. Was to that. And UWM had a program to send a certain number of students out to Washington, D.C. each semester. And so I participated in that. And it was a great experience. It truly was. And, it helped to, no, I thought maybe at one point, maybe it would be nice to live in Washington, D.C. and, be part of that. And I think, retrospectively, I'm glad I made the choices I did, and I'm here today.
Well, I love these experiences, right? Because they open your eyes to then the reality.
Yep.
Like, again, we can get the Hollywood version of it, but then you get there and you're like, oh, I always think about Martha Bennett, who, I don't know if you know Martha. She's
know her well and heard her on your podcast. Yeah.
She's like my quiet hero. Like, I love her. She is like the most amazing person to be in the world. And she talks about that in her podcast interview about how there's the duality of policy work and really activating the brain and really diving in, like, what is this, what are these policies and how are these impacting? But she always says, I get not bored, but she goes, I need that impact. I need city management to know that what we're doing is, because policy can be years, and you might never see the impact of what
Right.
you're doing. And so I think it's always interesting, yeah, to give these experiences to people to go, oh, okay, yeah, maybe that's cool. I like it, but that's not what I probably love, where I would want to give my life to. So then tell us about what happens. I want to go into that story about this interaction with I think you said the deputy city manager of Apple Valley. What
Yeah.
happens when you go, for one day of law school, it's not it, and then give us the frame. What happens?
Yeah, I was, my mind was sort of thinking about this for a while, trying to recollect many years ago now, but, sort of thinking about it. I remember getting my first assignments, I think, before law school started. And I think I sort of joked, I think, the assigned reading for the first day of law school was probably more than all of an entire undergraduate class that you'd have in a semester. And that didn't bother me. I mean, it was, like I said, the mind was in it. It's just that the heart wasn't. And I know I wanted to do something in government, but it's almost as though, in your brain you were trained to say, well, you need that prerequisite of a law degree. And so, like I said, I was very calm about it, and just talked to so many people, and I just heard the same theme over and over and over. And knew that this was going to be a joint program. I think at the time, usually law school was 3 years, but I was going to do a 4-year program with a dual MPA. Thinking, maybe still state or federal government, but, maybe something in state government as well. Who knows? Or, working, indirectly with government. And so, it wasn't, it probably caught, some people by surprise, but, it really wasn't a surprise for me. It sort of reconfirmed that maybe I needed that day experience. Like I said, I think that, the registrar at the time said, yeah, there's a lot of people that come in and have this conversation, but they have a very different look on their face, and they have a more excited tone than you have. You're very calm. It seems like you've thought this out. And, I credit a lot of people with those conversations. And so, it's one of those decisions that once I made it, I literally have never looked back on that decision, never questioned it, never looked back. And it was certainly the right decision. I sort of joke, I just had another month to prepare for graduate school. And so I started that about a month later, and that was going to be a night program. And so, I wanted to do something during the day. And like I said, I can still see the table. I think it was a white table where I'm sort of standing at the table, and usually, you're sort of, probably intimidated. You don't, know exactly what you're getting into. And so, I can still remember the gentleman, sort of fumbling and looking for something. And, like I said, if I wouldn't have asked him what he needed, and it was probably unlike me at the time, being younger, to probably ask that, things could have turned out very different, but I did. And, like I said, I think I was in an interview or a conversation with the HR director and him probably 3 or 4 days later, and I think I started the next week.
And you were it was an internship to the city administrator. Again,
Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, I was working in the city administrator and in public work. He was the deputy city administrator slash public works director. And actually, one of the interesting things, the city had just through, I believe it was a referendum, taken on ownership of a cemetery. And it was a very historical cemetery, and they didn't really know what to do with it other than they now owned it. So I, myself, and someone else became responsible for that cemetery. And then they had also bought additional land to basically, it was like a development project, just very different. But then they also had to understand what they got into. So I remember spending 3 days in, the Twin Cities area in Minnesota in December, out at the cemetery, just trying to, correlate, or inventory what may be within the cemetery proper. And ultimately I worked on so many different things. I mean, that really shaped that experience. And ultimately I was promoted to, I think they called it administrative assistant to the administrator, because there was also an assistant administrator there too, and had a really great experience, and did that all throughout my my graduate studies at Hamlin.
I love this again when you get to do an MPA and get your hands dirty in the actual work, so you get to see it. What was it? What was that like? Or maybe I mean, you told us what it's like, but was there a light bulb moment where you were like, okay, this is it. I think I found my place, my home. Was there something there that really the light bulb came off?
Yeah, I loved it from, I mean, honestly, from the start. I think it was the diversity of the so many. I mean, I would get to do so. I'm gonna feel like something different every day. And I often say, even today, I think that was one of the hardest jobs because you really have to build trust, build relationships. I mean, everything that I went through as a child that my parents taught me about, was utilized because, I remember going to someone's office and saying, I really need to talk to you about this. Can we meet? Yeah, I'm available in 3 weeks. So it's about how do you facilitate getting that? Because I'm like, well, this is the thing I need to work on for the next 3 weeks, not wait 3 weeks to, chat about that. And so, there were a lot of skills there, and we had a very tragic incident in the community where a child was hit by a vehicle on his bike in a crosswalk, and traffic safety became a really significant issue in the community, obviously. And I they formed there was an ad hoc committee on traffic safety, and then there was also a traffic safety advisory committee, and I got to be part of that. And we had a very large project that engaged the community. And I think it was during that I actually wrote my I think they called it the equivalent of a thesis at Hamlin. And that paper was actually recognized on that process that we utilized and the principles that we utilized to that process. And honestly, I still think of that today when we go about how we approach things, characteristics that aren't earth shattering, but, professionals don't have a monopoly on, great ideas. Look at all angles, look at all perspectives, things like that. And so there were a lot of light bulb moments there that really just engaged me. And it was a way to be involved and see the tangible impact, like you said, of what you can do. I mean, I often say, and I'm sure we'll talk about it later in my experience with Bayside. I love working in a small community because I usually say, and one of my staff just said it to me this morning, they're like, Andy, we know what you're going to say. We have an idea in the morning and we can implement it in the afternoon. There's not a lot of bureaucracy that gets in the way. And so if there is a good idea, let's move with it. And you can see that impact tangibly right away.
I love it. Oh, it's so good. So you finish your MPA. You do this like you say. You're with Apple Valley the entirety of your MPA program,
Hmm.
which how amazing to be a part of. Again, you're really seeing, even in tragedy, how the impact of a local government responds and serves its city, engages them to be a part of that process. Your next stop is the city of Whitewater, Wisconsin, but it's as a human resources director. It's kind of an interesting move.
Yeah.
Tell us about the move to Whitewater and that position.
Yeah, I didn't realize how political the position was until after I got there. This was a little bit different time where the internet was there, but it wasn't as prevalent. And they were trying to hire, or the city manager, I think, was trying to hire an assistant city manager, but through a lot of politics, it was the human resources director and special projects coordinator. Very long title. I don't even think I used the whole title because you can't fit it in most places. So, and they hadn't had a dedicated human resources person before. And so went there, learned a lot in that experience, and again, it was a diversity of task. It wasn't just HR. I mean, that was a component of it, but like in most communities, I also managed the IT function, did any type of special projects, tried to architect, because I think I only was there about 18 months. I think for about the first 14 to 16 months, there was a debate over where I would sit in the office. And so, learned a lot, both in good and ways I would do things differently. And yeah, it was a good experience. And I think it was ingrained in me to, look at any situation. What can you learn from the good? What can you learn from the not so good to take that in the future and build a better you and product in the future as well.
I think that's part of it. Yeah, exactly. The experiences that we go through is to go, okay, what can I learn here? And like this is one of the unique things about local government is, especially in these cities that are, I think Whitewater was around 16,000. And so you think that's a decent sized city, but all the people, especially the leaders in local government, you're wearing hats. Every position should come with a hat rack in the middle of your office to remind yourself of all these
Yeah.
various hats and roles that you guys have to wear. It's just a
Yeah.
wild.
It was, and one of the interesting things there was that was a university town, and I think it was about 4,000 of the population actually counted towards year-round students as well. So there was actually they had an interesting governance model of, I believe it was 5 elected officials that served on wards or precincts, and then 2 that were elected at large. So literally, a college student would sit on the governing body. The one seat was really dedicated for that area of the city. I don't know if it's still that way, but yeah, it was a very interesting experience, and yeah, many, many, many different hats.
So wild. I love it. And so you're there for, like you said, 18 months, couple years. You move from Whitewater to the village of Brown Deer, Wisconsin. And again, these are all kind of suburbs of Milwaukee, I think, in that kind of region. This is, again, 12,000-ish people. Tell us about the move there. And you become the assistant village manager. So now we're kind of, again, you're in that realm.
Yeah.
What was Brown Deer like?
Yeah, Brown Deer is actually just 2 communities to the west of me right now, and we work very closely. I'm sure we'll talk about that more later. But yeah, it was very interesting. I joked when I moved here, it's like, well, I can't move any farther east or I'll be in Lake Michigan. But yeah, Brown Deer, it was the assistant village manager position. I guess I liked long titles, but they also called it community services director as well. And they had created, they had reorganized and consolidated like building inspections, planning and zoning, engineering all together at the time. So I was able to take on that challenge. And again, it related anything from, doing the communications to doing the technology, the website, to the phone system, to managing building inspections and engineering and zoning and stuff. And Brown Deer is, we call it the North Shore of Milwaukee, one of the North Shore suburbs right on the borders the western edge of the city of Milwaukee, and then also the county border as well. So worked for a really good boss. Brown Deer had a reputation of just churning out assistant after assistant after assistant. So knew it to be managers and knew that was going to be a really good position, and was happy to be back in that area, because having born and raised in Southeast Wisconsin, Brown Deer was a really good opportunity. A lot of redevelopment opportunities, and that's where I met a lot of people that ultimately, honestly, I still interact with today in Bayside as well.
I love it. When in your story, was it when you interned in Apple Valley? Was it along the way in Whitewater, Brown Deer? When did you know you wanted to be a city manager, administrator? When was that a part of the story? When it was clear, like, this is what you feel destined to do?
That's a great question. I don't know if there was that aha moment. It probably, I think it probably, as soon as I got into it, I mean, I always want to, try to, continually achieve and build and grow. But I think that desire, the strong desire really started to burn in Brown Deer. Again, I was only there 18 months as well. I wasn't looking to go anywhere, and this opportunity just happened to pop up. And I remember talking to my boss, and it's Bayside is a smaller community, and so he said, "Yeah, I'll support you 100%. You'll be great at it." But it was one of those things where you don't know what you're getting into until you get into. I think one of the things that my boss in Apple Valley said to me, and maybe that was one of the key points. I remember sitting in his office. I still remember talking to him, I feel like it was yesterday, and we were talking about my performance evaluation, and he's like, "Andy, you have a really strong ability to handle things that are manage things that are in a constant state of flux." And I thought, to me, that is still the definition of city management to this day, is managing things that are in a constant state of flux, in all the things that we do, and sort of that juggling that we do. And so, I don't, like I said, I don't know if there was that aha moment, but I think a series of moments led to that.
I love it. I want to, obviously then you become the village manager of Bayside, and you've been there. I think you just celebrated, right? Is this 20 years, 2 decades?
It's hard to believe. Yeah, I just celebrated 20 years this last January. It'll be 21 in this coming January now. Yeah, that is just hard to believe. I haven't aged at all, but my tenure has grown.
It is so amazing. And there's so many things I want to dive into here, but I want to hit on what you just said. It's managing that constant flux. Now that you're going to be in the seat, and you've been in the seat for 2 decades, How does that, one of the unique things about city management specifically is the responsibility of managing that constant kind of chaos and present day realities of what it takes to make a city flourish. But also you have to also live in the future of where are we
Yeah.
going? Are we staying economically viable? What are the issues on the horizon? How are we staying with like infrastructure, just infrastructure alone? The reality is we can we built the bridge, it's done. I don't have to think about it for another 2 generations. But then all of a sudden it's there and now it's billions of dollars to fix or whatever it is. How do you, especially as the manager, live in that tension of keeping the team focused and flexible to the everyday changing realities of what it takes to run a flourishing city, but also keeping your eyes on the horizon to make sure that the city continues to flourish?
Yeah, I think, not only in Brown Deer, but in Bayside, the level of collaboration, cooperation, intergovernmental cooperation is just amazing. I'm sure we'll talk about that. We have so many different type of consolidated entities that we are part of or run or whatever it may be. And I was so fortunate. I've only worked for 2 village presidents in the 21 years that I've been here, and both have been great. And I think, during the late 90s, when you talk about infrastructure, that makes me think in the late 90s, the community was devastated by a storm. And the community basically said, we are going to do what it takes to make sure this doesn't happen again. And when I came in 2005, that was a focus. And, continuing, I guess it's just ingrained in who I am, and maybe praise or blame my parents for that again. I'll talk about them a lot, I guess. But, we need to continue to think, because what the storms of 2005 are not the storms of 2025. This last August, I think it was August 10th of this year, we got 12 inches of rain in about 6 hours. We haven't had that happen before, but, we're looking at infrastructure that can, the infrastructure we did is great, but it's not enough. And so we need to look at that differently and constantly looking at that. And I've thought a lot about, being in a community as long as you are, that certainly, moving communities is challenging, and staying in a community is challenging as well, because some of those things, oh yeah, I remember trying that, but you got to keep fresh. And so you don't want to say that, and look at it a little bit differently. And so we've really, I know you talked about, interviewing Mike Land and culture, and we really tried to work a lot on the culture to be nimble and understand, and our staff really understands that, as far as again, it's that mentality of being small and having the idea in the morning and implementing it in the afternoon. Innovation and collaboration are so important in what we do, and staying fresh is fundamental to what we do.
We're living through one of the biggest shifts local government has ever seen. Not political, not cultural, it's digital. AI, automation, cybersecurity, cloud migration, none of this used to be part of your job description. But now it's the choppy water every city and county is swimming in. And for many leaders, it feels less like innovation and more like what's going to break next, and will we survive it? Here's the truth most people won't say out loud. A lot of governments aren't afraid of the cloud. They're afraid of getting it wrong. Because the stakes are real. You're trying to protect data, modernize ancient systems, improve service, and keep your residents happy, all while staying under budget and out of the fire. That's why I appreciate the team at Tyler Technologies. They don't talk about the cloud like it's magic pixie dust. They break it down. What to migrate, when to migrate, how to get long-term value without blowing your budget or burning out your people. They've helped more local governments make this transition than anyone I know, and they've put all their best insights into a new ebook about cloud adoption and strategy. If you're trying to lead your organization into the future instead of getting dragged there, you got to check this out. Their newest guide is called Modern Governments Live in the Cloud, and you can download it for free at tylertech.com/winter. That's tylertech.com/winter, WINTER. tylertech.com/winter. Go check it out. Download the free guide. Now, back to the conversation. How do you, again, to be in a place 20 years, and it's not like you're in a huge 100,000, with thousands of employees. And so I would assume that it can be easy to get stale. It can be easy just to do what you've always done. How do you keep the team fresh? Maybe give us a picture of what it looked like when you came in 2005, And what's that journey been of kind of, maybe there was some culture change, maybe there was some, what's that journey been like over 20 years to keep fresh and to keep things moving and exciting and not just dull?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I haven't had that day that's been stale yet. I thought I would, and I think there's two. As I was thinking about this, and I think you mentioned it before as we were prepping, this has been almost very therapeutic to think back because I don't find myself very interesting, and so when you think of your story, it's like, what am I going to say? But I remember in Brown Deere, my boss at the time when I told him I was going to be leaving, he's like, "Well, call me in 9 months when you've done everything you need to do, and I'll have you back in a heartbeat." And I come to find out at my 4-year anniversary of being in Bayside that, the board was giving me my evaluation in an executive session. And I could see some like talking back and forth, and some were mad and some were happy. And I'm like, what's going on? Well, they had a bet that I would only be there 4 years. The manager before me had been here 15 years. So the last two managers, myself and the last manager, had a lot of longevity. But before that, there was a significant amount of turnover. I think they went through 4 managers in less than 2 years. And so the person before me brought some stability, and they were looking for someone to come in and bring a change agent. Ironically, as I was, again, thinking back about this, I didn't even make it home from the interview when they called me and offered me the position. I was halfway home, and they offered me the position. Ironically, it's funny how things work out. I had applied to be the city manager in the city of Whitewater where I was, and I thought, oh, what a great fit going back to a community I work for, things like that. And that didn't work out. And once again, things work out how they do. I was very blessed to have that not work out and have this opportunity to pursue. And so, that being that, change agent initially, and then working in the spirit of collaboration, Bayside, while it's a small community of about 4,400 people, with all the, like I said, with all the consolidation things we do, we were able to regionalize a dispatch center in Bayside in 2011. It had been studied for about 30 years, but now we run a seven community dispatch center. And we also have the consolidated fire department as part of that dispatch center. So we own, operate, manage that center, and we're the designated PSAP, primary safety answering point, for all of Milwaukee County, the largest county in the state. We're small. We have a small staff, but we do IT for 5 communities and 3 other types of agencies and a joint fire department. We serve as the fiscal agent for 4 community libraries. So our footprint is much larger than just Bayside, but our residents that come home and sleep here every night, that's a little bit smaller. And it's ironic, but there's always a new challenge that comes up. Right now we're building a public library that's been talked about for about 20 to 30 years, along with a new about $100 million redevelopment along the expressway. And when your total value is about $1 billion, $1 million development is significant. And such. And, we're working on some stormwater projects that we have been talking about for 30 years. So all those things have come up over time. And I think almost about the leadership journey, there's almost been so many different chapters of the leadership journey as you go through this, because there's been different challenges and the organization has needed different things over the years. And that's honestly, been one of the most exciting things to sort of reflect on.
I think what's interesting again about you, I think about, I just got off the phone actually earlier today with Bill Wagner in Arcola, Illinois, and don't tell Bill, but he's like one of my favorite people on earth.
Okay.
He was the first city manager or city administrator of Arcola. He's been the only city administrator, and he just loves that city. And you can tell every conversation is about how do we serve this? How do we do great things here? And so there's something cool about longevity in a position that usually doesn't have. I think the average tenure of a city manager is 4 to 5 years. And there's a lot of things that go into that. But the reality is when you are in a place for 20 years, you're able to really be a part of so much. And that's why I want to hear, because again, 2005, here's what I think. Automatically, I think of, the big housing recession. You have that. Yep. You have obviously COVID and the pandemic.
Mhm.
There's a lot of things that I'm sure happened. What has that been like? And tell us maybe about Bayside. Who lives in Bayside? Where do they work elsewhere? Do they just live there? Tell us about Bayside. Give us the feel of it and what that journey's been like over 2 decades.
Yeah, it's again, prepping for this, it's like, I've only been the village manager in one community. Realization, light bulb, but yeah, yeah, when you're in a position like me, you don't even have a resume ready because or updated because you've been here so long. Bayside is a phenomenal community. We're as I mentioned, it's a community of about 4,400 residents, growing with our redevelopment on the west side of the village along the expressway. So we're bordered by, we're basically 10 miles north of the city of Milwaukee downtown. We're right along the shores of Lake Michigan. There's no public access. I take that back. There's probably a small sliver of public access in a county park on our southern end that we share with another community. We do have about a 200-acre, what's called the Schlitz Audubon Nature Center. It's a nature center on Lake Michigan, 200 acres, and it's absolutely beautiful. And so we do all have a lot of partnerships, and it's a regional destination for a lot of people. They also run a school there as well. Primarily residential. I think it's 85% residential, rather affluent community. Housing prices are high. Service expectations are very high. A very, very appreciative community of the things we do. And I'll say that's one of the things that's always, made me love where I work, is that the community overwhelmingly is very appreciative of what we do. It's a partnership. It's you know people's names. A lot of people are related. It's a smaller business footprint. Things will be changing obviously with bringing a library into the community. We're moving that from two communities down up to Bayside, so that's very exciting as well. But again, that's the Bayside footprint, and then we have this other service footprint of like in dispatch, we end up serving about 70,000 people, just in between the seven communities. So there's different audiences that we serve. I mean, just in the last month alone, we've added two clients on to be IT part, that we service IT for. So there's a little bit of a business model here too. And honestly, just today, we just expanded our footprint with being the fiscal agent for a library as well. So it's a little bit different in that sense, and it diversifies the opportunity then too.
So it's so fascinating. Again, every city, every place is a little different, and so it's always interesting to
Yeah.
see the dynamics that, like, what are they up to? What are you doing? And like you say, it is really interesting when you're a suburb of a large city like a Milwaukee. All these, again, you have a lot of border cities right next to each other, right? It's like I'm in Olympia, the capital city of Washington, and we've got Tumwater and Lacey. And sometimes I'm like, did Stevie Wonder draw the border lines? Like, it's kind of crazy how anything makes sense. But
Well, an interesting note on that front, we basically, if you were driving from Milwaukee to Green Bay, you'd pass through Bayside along the expressway. But in the community to the south of us, we have a shopping mall where literally the first 10 feet of the building is in Bayside, and then the remaining part of the building is in the other community. And that, we have a gas station, one of the gas stations where the majority of the gas station is in Bayside, but the remaining part of the canopy is actually in the other community. So yeah, how boundaries are drawn, no one understands that, but obviously there's value and logistics and all of that that go along with that. So yeah, a lot of things, you don't have the time to figure out why did that happen, but they are the way they are. We're actually in two counties. So for us, we get to do everything two different ways. We have a small cul-de-sac along Lake Michigan in Ozaukee County, and then most of it's in Milwaukee County. But then we also have three school districts as well. So for a small community, we have a high school district, and then two elementary and middle school districts that split the community, and they service much more than just Bayside. But yeah, so it makes tax bill administration, elections, permitting, all of those things a little more interesting and honestly more difficult to communicate because you're communicating with many different audiences.
That's what I was just going to say. The communication has got to, is it means your job probably is a lot of meetings, a lot of like, what are we doing? How are we communicating? How are we, so there's not redundancy and overlap or balls dropping because someone assumes someone else. What does that look like in your specific role in just the communication of all those organizations to bring everyday services to residents, to people who come play, live, work, etc.?
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the things I'm honestly most proud of. Really, since day one, we have been had a very robust communications and outreach program. I mean, we send a weekly electronic newsletter. I know that's pretty, I don't want to say it's common now, but it's much more common than it was, 15, 20 years ago when we started it. And most people know that know me know the Bayside Buzz because they get the weekly email from me and things like that. But there's so many different components of how we outreach. I mean, when I started here, talk about how things change. We're small enough that we would take hand deliveries to each mailbox and put them on the flag to get them out to people. Obviously, those types of things have changed, but we want to try to keep people informed, especially when you're a service provider like we are. So many things are happening, changing, timing, all those different things that we want to communicate. And especially Wisconsin's doing more with referendums now, and which school district am I in? How does this impact me? How does our tax bill board, because the tax bills just went out last week, has the three different districts, but the first part is where do you live, and then what are the different tax impacts based on where you live in the village as well. So yeah, it presents its challenges, but it presents its opportunities. There's a lot of one-on-one conversation. I mean, we try to really encourage people just to, our staff to, call people back, talk to them, help them understand that we're here to serve them. And that's what we want to try to do. And yeah, communication, we've been recognized on many fronts and do presentations on that as well, and really try to engage people in a different way. We really embrace the Daniel Pink, the right brain thought process in our communications to connect with people.
I love it. You mentioned something about, I think it was a flood that happened in the 90s in the
Yeah.
community. I'm in Washington, which is just flooding like crazy right now.
Yes.
All this, and I think about, I grew up in a little farm town, Sylvana, and we lived up above the valley, but the valley always flooded, and it was just chaos. I mean, the river, Still-Glamish River, is right there. And I remember in the 90s, I think it was 91, they had it was probably the worst. And I remember all the buildings downtown had to rebuild. It was that bad. And so they all built up. In fact, in my keynotes I gave, I show an old picture of the cafe and now a new one, and you can see the cement, it's like 2 feet off
Yeah.
now there's stairs up, and I'm sure it's flooded again. And like you said, you respond to these events and you repair and you rebuild with the mindset, but no one has the endless amount of budget to just rebuild it perfectly so it will withstand any future reality. And like you say, that's why cities there's always work to be done in responding. What has it been like over the last 20 years? What are some of the lessons you've learned as you've responded to things, as you've come through even
Mhm.
like the pandemic? What are some things that you're learning that maybe we can encourage some of the other city managers who are listening to either they can nod and go, oh, I'm not alone in that, or maybe some
Yeah.
insights that you've learned to go, man, this has really shaped me, how I've led and what we've been able to do here at Bayside.
Yeah, I think one of the things for me, I mean, I feel like we've got a little bit of like almost like a natural disaster theme, but I think with every large rain event, and when I say some type of flood, and I say I really don't use the 100-year storm metric anymore because we've had so many of those, and I think we're up to 9 or 10 in the time I've been here. I've been out in each one of those, so I can see it firsthand. And I think that is so important because you're right, the resources aren't unlimited. But being out there firsthand, having the tenure that I do, and some of my staff does as well, is that you're able to see that. And I often say, well, we can be an engineer's worst nightmare because what you see out in the field and what you put on paper may be two very different things. And so when the flood happened in August with the 12 inches of rain, I happened to be on my way on vacation. I quickly came back and was here for, I don't even remember how long, just, tending to all the different issues that were coming up. But you're out there seeing it firsthand. You're talking to people, figuring out what they experienced. And I think that is so valuable. I think, and not, unfortunately, I think I sit in my office more than I'd like to. You like to be out more, but experiencing that, you can really, tangibly look at things in different ways. One of the things I think that we're working on right now is a very large stormwater project that has been a legacy goal for probably 30, 40 years. And, we're just on the precipice of being able to implement that. And, when you see that, that is so rewarding, to see that. And so I think, a lot of times I think, there's nothing wrong with the, theory of you work in this size community, you go to the next community and so on. But I think, in my, and I guess in numerous roles, and one of, I know we'll talk about ICMA later, but I've talked about sort of that small community aspect. You have to do many of the same things. You just don't have a lot of the same resources, and so you get that. I mean, I knew very little about stormwater before I came to Bayside. Now I know a lot. Probably maybe in some respects a little bit too much, or too much to be dangerous. But I can tell you, if this drop of water drops here, here's the impact it's going to have in the community. So I think it's, embracing that has, I've just found great success, and really it's been a joy to, be part of these last, 21 years. And I think, building those relationships too are just so important. When we talk about the collaboration, the consolidation that we do, I think so much of that is about, it's about the relationships. I think that's one of the things that's difficult. I know we're sort of meeting, I guess the 21st century version of being in person is, looking at you on a screen, and, it's hard to develop relationships that way. I say, consolidating dispatch or some of the other things that we did, in 2010, 11 would be so much more difficult now, or maybe not be able to achieve, post COVID. It's just obviously COVID, we weren't, in person much, but, even out of that now, it's just easier to get on the screen. You can probably do two things at once, and save time and so on, but it doesn't, it's more difficult to accomplish some of those larger things. And so
I think too, and maybe that's a great segue into both the ICMA, the Wisconsin City Management Association, which I have the pleasure of coming out and keynoting the conference here in February, the winter conference. And so there is, again, technology is great because it gives us the ability to have some more connection that maybe we would if we just had in person. But there's something about in person, about those relationships that form when you just have physical presence together, and not just the relationships, but the beauty of relationship, the support, the encouragement, the insights, the ability to just be present with one another. Maybe talk about what has your experience been like as you've been in city management with things like the WCMA, with the ICMA. Obviously, you just got back from Tampa, which I'm sure for Wisconsin, that was nice to get warm there. You got warm before you settled in for the winter. What are these associations? What have they been like for you? And how would you encourage people to participate in them to really get something out of them, not just to have your name right on the roster, but to really benefit from participation?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think I was very fortunate. I think early in my career, I think it was probably 2007 or 2008. I was able to participate in Leadership ICMA, and I think the last few years, especially under Tiny Angie, who is now past president of ICMA, but really talked about membership matters. And it does. And membership matters, and engagement matters. And it's really, what you put into it. And I was very blessed very early in my career to participate in a 2-year Leadership ICMA program. And I give that a lot of credit. I was able to attend the Senior Executive Institute out in Virginia as part of that program, and, learn from, Bob O'Neill, the past executive director of ICMA, and people like that. And you get so much out of that because there's so many challenges that we share. They may be a little bit different in size and scope, but a lot of those challenges and issues are very similar, and leadership principles and things like that. And yeah, I was able to, I think, Bayside's given me the opportunity to participate in those as well. I forget the year the year I was president of WCMA was the year that the ICMA conference was in Milwaukee. And that was really interesting. And, I think it's just been a passion to be engaged and do something, more. I mean, honestly, the things you learn from those experiences and you take away and take back to your community. I'll just give you a small example. When I served on the ICMA executive board, one of the things they did every year was taking financial policies, to the board every year to look at them, examine them, update them, whatever it may be. And, again, very, very small example, but it's just one that sticks out. I can think of right now where, we do that here as well. And so, I think there's so much learning that can take place by connecting with people, by talking to people, even, not only in, different parts of this state, but different states, different countries, the challenges are similar. And so, I would encourage people, get involved in a task force, a committee, whatever it may be. I served on, countless, task force and committees, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about too. But, I think it's really what you put into it. Like a lot of our communities, there's not generally a lot of people volunteering to serve on those things. I think our profession does a little bit better job than maybe what's, happening in our communities right now. But it's important, because you can make that difference, by participating and by engaging.
I think that's kind of the key is just like you just said it. It's always sad to me that people vote, in the national election and get so worked up over it. And it's like, is it really impacting your life as much as like local government impacts your life every day?
Yeah.
And yet like, it's like less than 10% turn out to vote. It like you say, it can be the same thing in associations. You get out what oftentimes you put in. And if you're looking for more, the answer to that question isn't, well, ICMA needs to give me more, the WCMA or whatever your association is. It's how can you contribute? How can you be a part? And so maybe help maybe a listener today who's either not in the ICMA or maybe thinking about or is in like, what is there? What can I be a part of? Like you say, there's all kinds of committees and tasks forces to be a part of.
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't have a list in front of me, but they are countless. I know on the either, the ICMA website or in my state, the WCMA website, let's take WCMA, for example. I mean, there's numerous committees. And usually there's no limit to the number of people that can be on them, that I'm aware of at least. And so, part of it is just that outreach or, I would encourage people, contact the state president or the executive director of, if you have that in the state association. And remember, that may sound intimidating, but those people are the same as you. When I started in this career, I never thought, I'd be, president of WCMA or certainly not president-elect of ICMA, but I'm just Andy. Just reach out, happy to talk, certainly from an ICMA perspective. People can certainly look on the website, reach out to staff, reach out to Mike or myself, whatever it may be, and, find the right connection. And a lot of those things you just learn. I think honestly, there's just as much benefit bringing back to the community, by some of the things you can learn. And it's not just learning being on the committee, but it's learning from all those people. Some of my closest friends and colleagues are, those that I participated in leadership ICMA and the executive board experience. I mean, I would encourage people, that's sort of the feeder program we've talked recently. I just recently chaired the governance task force for ICMA, which worked, there were two iterations of it. And I think it was 2 or 3 years long, but we talked about, developing those pipelines and getting people more involved in the committees, just like our communities, so that ultimately they can become executive board members or, become council members or trustees or elected officials in our communities. I think there's a lot of parallels here that you can build off of that to get people involved.
Yeah. It's again, there's, like you say, countless opportunities. Just raise your hand. Don't wait for people to come to you. You make it known and put some effort in. And I think that's kind of the reality of this podcast is so many people have said back from their internship days, they've raised their hand, they've said yes, they've looked for the opportunities, and life just kind of opens up. And so tell us.
I was just going to say, I think if you're willing, someone's going to find a spot for you to volunteer. There will be no shortage of opportunities.
That's right. Tell us about being the president-elect. Obviously, I said we had Mike Land on. He told us, but that was a year ago, so we all forget. And
yeah,
I think ICMA, it seems, again, we've got some fresh blood, right? We've got a new executive director. It seems like maybe some fresh wind. You always get that with kind of new leadership. Tell us about where the ICMA ICMA is headed, and what does it mean to be the president-elect? What is your role? What are the another hat to put on the hat rack?
Yeah, yeah, it's truly a humbling. It is, I guess, to maybe speak to your second part first. I mean, I think, when I interviewed, I said, this would be the first ever from Wisconsin, obviously an honor in the smallest community I believe ever to be represented by, as an ICMA president. Usually, I think a lot of people think, and I hope I can instill hope in a lot of small town managers, and small town's a relative term. What does that mean? Every state's a little bit different, but if I can do it with a population of 4,400, anybody can do it if if you want to, and if you want to put your mind to it. But certainly getting involved with that. Yeah, it's an exciting time for ICMA, with Julia Novak, new executive director, coming on board. I think the biggest thing I can do is support her and her team. I mean, she, as you probably noticed in Tampa, just a lot of ideas. Obviously, there's a lot of change happening. ICMA has been impacted by, just financial challenges related to the loss of federal grants and things like that. So the size and scope of the organization has changed, but, we're really committed to that. Membership matters. How can we provide the most efficient, the most value to the members, and really getting back to that core, of what we do and we can do well. And I think it's an exciting time. I think when you go through the process, I had the I guess good fortune of interviewing against four other people, and when I put in my paperwork, I said there's not. By the time I interview, the dynamics will probably be so different because we're in such a time of rapid change, just with everything happening at the federal level. With Julia, I think when I put in my papers, Julia may have been announced the day before, and then obviously by the time I interviewed in June, she had been on for a few months. I think, to her credit, she's had to take on more in probably 10 months than most people do in a career, and has done so in a fabulous job. So, I think those are some of the things that are going to be a focal point. We're also working on sort of a strategic roadmap for the organization. The last strategic plan was done in, I believe, 2017. And so, developing that roadmap for the next few years is going to be interesting. And, really being part of a 21 member executive board made up of 21 city managers. I mean, it's a great opportunity. I think when I do talk about it, it's so humbling and such an honor. It's hard to realize that this has happened. But excited about it. I have two great partners in both Mike Land as current president and Tanya Angie, as past president, who have been great mentors to help me with that transition into this role as well. So.
I love it. I love it. I think, again, I'm just a huge supporter of associations and for the community and the relationships and obviously the training and those things, but it's really the relationship. And I think I have such I was a pastor for over a decade, and I think there's a lot of similarities between a pastor and a city manager. You both love your communities and these people so deeply. And like you said, in fact, this will be a good transition. You said that, I think you mentioned like a flood happened. You're on your way out to vacation and something happens, right? You turn the car around. I think I was talking with Austin Blease a couple days ago, same thing. Like, he's planning on this and all of a sudden has to come back home, from some trip to Minnesota. This is the reality of city management. Like, you're on. It's a role that doesn't really shut off. It's got a lot of highs with the celebrations, but it has a lot of lows because you get the police report, you get the things that, right, of all the tragedies and the hardships and the struggles. And so tell us maybe about how do you, I talk about work-life balance. I say balance is BS. There's no such thing as balance. It's just intention. How do you have intention with all of your life? So what does that look like for you, Andy? What's that look like, especially over 20 years? I would imagine one of the struggles when you're a city manager in a new place every 4 or 5 years, I don't know if you ever feel settled. There's just so much going on and so much new. You've been able to kind of maybe settle into a pace. But I'm sure it's still not easy. It's still, right, the same realities of tension and distraction. How do you do work-life balance? How do you stay healthy so you have something to pour out of health to the job and the people you serve?
Yeah, I'm not sure I've exactly figured that one out. I've listened to you obviously, and saw some of the notes and things, and had to think long and hard about that. I think one of the things I'll say first is that I think if you ask my staff, I probably have never settled. That's one thing I just really don't believe in. I think I saw something recently, and I don't remember exactly what it said, but it really talked about when you love what you do and you're passionate about what you do and you're engaged, you don't mind, being interrupted because it's a part of what you do. And certainly I'm more than a village manager. But is so much of what I am, and I enjoy it. I love what I do. Um, and so, I'm certainly not the best at it. I wouldn't have, I'm not sure I can give people, great tips on how to balance that. I think I've had to, reassess that with, having, what some could consider a second job, as president-elect of ICMA. But I think one of the things that, probably really wasn't sure if I was going to talk about this, but I am going to bring it up. In December of 21 in my hometown, the Christmas parade, my wife actually works for the city there, and someone unfortunately drove into the parade and killed 6 people, injured about 70, and just countless people. Created mental health issues, obviously, and very traumatic. And we were there. We saw a lot of things that you just can't unsee. And I think in what we do in our profession is we run in when other people run out. And I remember getting our boys into the car, but then saying we need to go in and help people. And then you hear gunshots and things like that, and it's like, what is going on? And I think that really helped. I don't want to say help, but it made me sort of reassess and reprioritize, that you do have that impact. You do want to help. In the same respect, you do need to take care of yourself, because I'll tell you, I mean, there's been times where, yeah, the balance, it gets imbalanced, and, it's that work-life balance can be really challenging. And there's times like that. I think, the biggest thing is having a support system that can help support, a loving family, a great staff, parents that are very supportive, siblings, all of that, friends. And so, I think that, that assessment, that's been 4 years. And unfortunately, we have that reminder on that anniversary every year now. But, once you go through something like that, and I guess see the things I saw, it's like you think about work and you think about life a little bit differently. I wish we didn't have to, see those things or have those things happen, to make it. But I think, a lot of times we get so embroiled in what we do every day that we just need to step back a little bit and, remember it's important. But a lot of times I try to take the metric or the perspective of, would someone else in another community even, know or worry or understand what this problem is? They have a different issue. One of my bosses once told me, it's like, you're going to deal with the same people in every community. They just have a different name. And I think that, it's good perspective, to, I think after going through the parade incident, it was hard for a while to, I mean, a lot of things seemed very trivial. And I can tell you, there's a lot of first world problems that we deal with. But I always say here too, whatever that problem is, if we don't take care of those small things, we can never focus on the big things. And I think, I try to meet everybody with their level of intensity of the problem they have and try to solve it. I love solving problems. And so I probably, that was a little bit of rambling, maybe a little bit incoherent, a little bit therapeutic though as well, to, try to talk about, how you balance this out. Yeah, during that August storm, I left my family in a hotel in a different city and had to have my mother-in-law come pick them up because I had to go back to work. And I didn't even know how I would get back to work because all the roads were flooded. So, that's part of the job. That's part of what we do. And I don't think, we don't look for the accolades, and we don't, it's uncomfortable even talking about things like that, but that's what we do for our communities. And I think that's, hopefully what we can spread the word and have people value, particularly in this time where it's more difficult, for everybody working in our profession and public sector as a whole.
Absolutely. It's why this podcast exists, because I don't think, especially city managers, are not prone to shine the spotlight on themselves. In fact, it's the biggest pushback I get when I reach out to people and go, "Hey, come on the podcast." And they go, "Oh, I'm trying to get, I don't want the spotlight. I don't want it." And I'm like, okay, I get it, but we've got to let people know what local government does. We
Yeah.
have to, I think, let our residents know who are the people who are on the watch, right? You guys
Yeah.
are the Batman, the Superwoman. You are there doing the work that has to be done. Like you say, that story, and thank you for sharing that about the Christmas Day parade, because these are, again, someone's got to be there to pick up the pieces,
Yeah.
to carry people forward. And a lot of that work, it's one of the things I try to dig into on these stories. Like, you remind me of Gita Newkirk, city manager of Highland Park, Illinois,
Yep.
had a very
Yep.
similar with the 4th of
They
July.
were the year after, quite
Yeah.
honestly. Yep.
And
Mhm.
these are and we got into that on the podcast about how do you recover. And it was like one of the things that just stood out, and it still just rings in my ears, about how a few years later people were like, well, we need to bring it back. Like, we can't let a terror win. And some people were like, how can we even think about bringing it back? It's so PTSD. And so you have both people, and this is,
Yeah.
again, and guess what? City management has to make decisions and has to walk with people. And again, people don't realize, I think, the weight. That's why I say there's this reality of pastoral ministry of you are caring for people's
I
hearts and minds, not just their physical realities.
My father-in-law was a pastor, and yeah, I can, we've, my wife and I have talked about that, in talking, prepping for this, talking about that, how many similarities there are. And yeah, it is challenging, but I think, going back to something we talked about earlier, when you're present in the community and people see you, I've never said this out loud, but we're sort of like the Secret Service person off to the side. You sort of see the shoulder, and maybe the earpiece, but you don't see anything else. And that's sort of the way I think a lot of us want to be. We don't want to be out front, but we want to make sure, things are, taken care of. And, I can tell you, it's been one of those years that just, up and down significantly. And, there are rewards. I'll share something I forgot to mention before, because I don't get too many surprises anymore in the community, but this year has been the ups and the downs. We had a significant health scare with my dad. I lost someone very close to me early in the year. Get selected as ICMA president, and then the village board, unbeknownst to me in January, as part of my evaluation and recognizing me for being 20 years, ends up naming the community playground after me. And I think that was so humbling. I was caught so off guard. They did this without me knowing it all, and they just announced it publicly. And I was like, wow, to see the legacy that you can have while you're still alive, not after you passed or anything like that, to name something after you, I think was just sort of an incredible, it gives you that level of reinvigoration to, if you ever think it's going to be stale, and certainly I haven't had that feeling, to continue to do what we do, and knowing that you have that impact and that people do appreciate it and see it, because we don't seek that, type of recognition out.
So it's such a powerful reminder. And I love that. Like, it's only stale days if you make it stale, right?
Yeah.
There's plenty of work to do. There's new changes. Like you say, there's so many outside influences on local government too. You never know, federal funding or new state policy. I mean, things are always kind of in flux that keep things, moving forward. And then you just throw in a pandemic or a flood and you got to figure it
Yeah.
out all over. So that's why I love it. I think it's incredible work. That's why I hope shining the spotlight on not only the leaders of it, but also all the employees, from leadership to front line. You all matter, and you're all doing significant work that's often taken for granted, and we just expect awesome service. But the reality is, we don't. We're not entitled to that. And so, thank you for leading the charge
Yeah.
on Bayside. And
Yeah, and like you said, I think it's the way you approach it. I mean, if you look at everything as an opportunity, and I think, Bayside, ICMA, so I think I appreciate about working with Julia as the executive director of ICMA and the board, is that there's so many opportunities that we can look at and improve and help all of us that are, doing this on a day-to-day basis. It's truly rewarding, and yeah, it's an awesome opportunity.
Oh, Andy, so good. Anything before we wrap? I want to be mindful of your time. Anything before we wrap you'd share, you'd encourage us with?
We've covered a lot. My head's a little bit swimming. I feel like I've been through an hour and 10-minute therapy session. No, I want to thank you for obviously everything you're doing as well to bring awareness to the profession, to things people do to tell those stories, to connect to people. I mean, I'm really looking forward to that over the next year. I think we'll see each other in more than just Wisconsin over the next year, conferences and things, and looking forward to that and really connecting. And I think, to me, again, knowing that that small community presence, oftentimes we focus on the large cities and things like that, but I think bringing that small community perspective, goes a long way. And certainly happy to talk to anybody out there that, has similar problems or, would just like to engage and develop a network. Happy to do that in either one of my roles or jobs these days.
Andy, you're an awesome person and you're an amazing leader. Bayside is blessed to have you. I'm glad that they've honored you with that park while you're alive. It's always a win to know that you're doing good work while you're alive. And I look forward to seeing I think the ICMA is on a great trajectory. I look forward to seeing what the year ahead holds. Thank you for raising your hand and being willing. I know you're busy enough in Bayside to not only add to it, President-Elect ICMA, and that's not just President-Elect, that's again this year, plus it's serving as the president in the next year. So we'll install you, I think, in Long Beach, right?
Yep, Long Beach.
Again, you luck out. You get to be warm again before braving the cold winter of Wisconsin. So,
exactly,
Andy,
yes.
Andy, thank you for sharing your life, your leadership journey, and your insights. Appreciate your time today.
Great. Thanks, Seth.
The stories we share here on the Halting Winter Podcast are part of something bigger, a movement to remind us where government truly lives. No, not in Washington, D.C., but right here at home, where we live, where we work, and where we play. Because it's in our cities, our counties, and our communities that the real work of democracy happens. And when local government thrives, people thrive. If this conversation inspired you, take a small step that makes a big difference. Subscribe to the podcast, share the episode, and follow along on social media. Every click helps amplify the stories that build pride, purpose, and belonging in local government. To learn more about the Halting Winter Project and how you can be part of the work that builds belonging, visit HaltingWinter.com. I'm Seth Winterhalter, and until next time, this has been the Halting Winter Podcast.